side. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, in the gallery, councillors, staff, and to those listening at home. Please be seated while Councillor Betts delivers the blessing. Thank you.
Thank you. Almighty God and Father, as we've gathered here for this council meeting, we first want to thank you for the many and abundant blessings that you've given us and to our city. Thank you for the gift of life itself, and thank you for the health and strength to be here. We thank you for the ability to be involved in the high calling of governing our city. We pray that our Mayor, as she chairs the meeting, we pray for the directors as they provide us with advice. We pray that we might weigh the matters before us with wisdom and take into account the needs of the people of our city. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Councillor Betts. Before we begin, I will acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. It is now 7 p.m. and I declare the meeting open. There are no announcement of visitors, so I'll just read the disclaimer. Members of the public are cautioned against taking any action on council decisions on items in which they may have an interest until such time as they've seen a copy of the minutes of the meeting or have been advised in writing by city staff. Just to let you know, we are live streaming, so please note that all council meetings are digitally recorded and live streamed on the city's YouTube channel, except for confidential agenda items, during which time the live stream will be temporarily suspended. Thank you. Record of attendance, Councillor Dewhurst is an apology and Councillor Baines is an apology, and Councillor Adams is joining us online. Thank you. So otherwise we're all here. Are there any disclosures of interest? No disclosures of interest. Announcements by a presiding member. Firstly, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Mr Chris Tallentire for his many years of service in the City of Gosnells, being the elected member for the seat of Thornley. I think 17 years he's been in that role, so we thank Chris for his efforts for the City of Gosnells, and also to congratulate the new soon to be sworn in members for the areas in the City of Gosnells, which is Mr Ron Sayo in the seat of Cannington, Miss Colleen Egan in the seat of Thornley, and Mr Terry Healy in the seat of Southern River. So congratulations to all of those. And now we go on to a federal election. See how we go with that. There are no other announcements from myself. So are there any reports from delegates? Councillor Lloyd, thank you.
I attended the AGLG meeting on the 26th of February as the Deputy Delegate. AGLG unfortunately have lost their coordinator again, and we're very thankful for Corrine from the City of Armidale for stepping in. They will be re-advertising shortly and switching to seeking a business administrator role over a coordinator, as that's where they've identified the greater need is for the organisation. The group is also now seeking insurance cover for friends of groups. Unfortunately, it was found that the insurance policy that they currently had didn't actually cover the friends of groups that fell underneath them. Mary Carroll are one of those who have been affected and have thus been unable to meet since December due to this, and are now unfortunately 3 months behind in their cooch control. I know a meeting was scheduled with the city to see how we could work with them to find a solution, and we look forward to an update on that. The 4th of May Plants for Locals program, we have 10,000 seedlings being put out to the community. Harmony Fields planting project is beginning soon, supported by RAC. And AGLG are seeking support to update their website if anyone has expertise that they would like to volunteer. One of the other topics raised was on securing a varied variety of local tube stock and whether growers could potentially meet the demand. A suggestion was made that we look into growing our own from local seeds so that we could help with the varied species, and I'm happy to hear that this topic will be coming to a workshop soon. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd, and just so you know that Mrs Eunice Robertson did have a meeting with myself and the CEO is looking into what's happening with that insurance, unless you have an update on that yet, maybe.
I know that there's been a meeting between city staff and AGLG to look at ways forward, but I haven't heard the outcome.
Okay, we look forward to that outcome. Any further reports from delegates? No, thank you. We'll now move on to question time. We have a few questions here. So first I'll invite Mr Leon Walker to come forward with your questions. I think we have time tonight, Mr Walker, so you may ask all of your questions.
After discussion with Mr Bradbrook, Madam Mayor, I withdraw question 3. Thank you. Question 1. Are the minutes of the annual electors meeting included in the agenda for the last OCM considered to be an accurate record?
Yes, they are.
Why do the minutes of the annual electors meeting include 2 different spellings for Mr Daniel Stevens with a V or Stevens with a PH name?
It's just a typo, which I think has been rectified now. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. May I apologise for inflating the value of repairs required to buildings at Carrican tenfold from the $3.2 million stated in the report of Home Integrity Building Consultants to $32 million in a question at the last OCM.
What's a dot between friends, Mr Walker? Yes, that's fine.
Some $30 million, Madam Mayor. Question 5. I refer to item 13.2.4 on the agenda at the last OCM. If Councillor Dewhurst were a friend of the applicant, Mr Alexander Stewart, would he have been required to declare an interest?
I'll get Mr Bradbrook to respond to this because there's a bit of depth into the response and I want to make sure that it is said correctly. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's really for individual elected members to determine whether they have a friendship with a person to an extent that it would affect their impartiality. And friendship extends obviously beyond just being mere acquaintances or people that talk from time to time. It goes much deeper than that. It's a very difficult thing to measure, friendship, but it really is up to individual elected members to determine whether they think their decision making is affected by the relationship with an applicant.
Thank you, Mr Walker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I next have Daniel Stevens with a V. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, I just want to ask a question about the Mannington Depot. We've been waiting for a long time for it to be moved. Hopefully it gets moved before I retire. That's all I could say. We've been waiting a long time. So my question is, when will the Mannington Depot be moved since the football club was moved in 2007?
Thank you for your question. Mr CEO will respond.
Madam Mayor, we're equally as keen as Mr Stevens to see the operations centre moved and to provide a much more modern and contemporary workspace for the city's staff. But I can't give a time. We're still working through a couple of final issues before we will know where we're going.
Thank you. Your next question, Mr Stevens?
I've only got one. I've got a public statement.
It is a public statement. Thank you. Well, we'll move on to public statements then. Mr Stevens, would you like to come forward with your public statement?
I'm speaking on 13.1.2, I think. So that was that motion that was passed at the annual electors meeting. So basically, this idea came about from myself and Councillor McDonald, who was volunteering at Homestead Park at that time, that the council should revitalise the Homestead Park, similar to what the City of Canning has done at the Kent Street Weir. And basically, this project would be funded 3 ways with the council, state and federal governments. And just very briefly, I don't think there's been major works done on that park on a lot of sections since the 80s, but I could be wrong about that. And yeah, so that's basically. I don't think the report hasn't got the detail that I was, and I think there's a miscommunication of what the motion was actually about. So I just wanted to say that, but hopefully something can be done about Homestead Park. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your statement. Others? So I have another statement from Mrs Kylie Webster. Okay.
Okay. I actually have 2 statements, if that's okay.
As long as it's in 3 minutes.
Yeah, just got to do it on two different items. Yeah, we've got just 3 minutes for it. You should be,
Oh, 3 minutes for both?
yeah.
I can try. So my
There you
first
go.
statement talks to item 13.1.1 regarding the tree canopy targets. This motion reflected the concerns of electors that our current tree canopy cover is just 15%. That actually drops to 10% in Maddington, and Perth was ranked as one of the most barren major cities in Australia. Respectfully, the city cannot claim that it supports increased canopy when its current target is to maintain the existing 15. A target of 30% by 2040 may not be feasible, but it's very disappointing that the city's report does not consider the feasibility of more modest targets. Perhaps 20% by 2040 may be more achievable. If the trees planted by the city every year are only able to maintain tree canopy at 15%, perhaps it is the planning system that needs to be reconsidered so that we aren't simply planting as we clear. The 13.1.1 report talks as if the city had to meet this target through public land under its control only. However, there are other levers that can be pulled, such as tree retention during subdivisions and development applications. I note there is a development application for vote tonight under item 13.2.2, and the aerial imagery of the site shows substantial vegetation. While there is a requirement for a landscape plan to be submitted, is there not also opportunity for this kind of clearing to require compensatory planting, so that there is no net loss in canopy cover? Perhaps a monetary contribution so that the city can replace the tree loss. With respect to public land, we have areas such as Harmony Fields with a cover of just 7%. Rather than a drive-in cinema, this area could be utilised in creating active recreational spaces, which are compatible with substantial tree canopy, such as nature-based play, walking and cycling tracks, a BMX track and picnic spaces. This would be in keeping with the Livable Neighbourhoods guidance and public tree strategy, and also be a more equitable use of the space, as it would be accessible to all, not just those with cars and disposable income. As a separate consideration, I do appreciate that not everyone sees the value in tree canopy. Common complaints include leaf litter and roots damaging infrastructure. These don't seem like impossible challenges. Perhaps the city could update its verge tree list with photos and information on root invasiveness, shade and water requirements, biodiversity values, and borer vulnerability. This may empower residents to choose verge trees more suited to the site and to resident preferences. Essentially, I'm hopeful that we can find solutions so that we can recognise the benefits of increased canopy cover across our city, not just on public land. The second statement. This is for item 13.2.2. The report states that this development is not permitted unless the local government has exercised its discretion by granting development approval. For the service station and fast food outlet component, such approval must also be made after consultation. The report notes that this decision is outside the authority delegated to staff for reasons including the objections received during the consultation period. Those objections included the proliferation of service stations and convenience stores and fast food outlets in the immediate area. This seems to me to be a very valid concern. For example, we have a situation in Maddington where a resident of Westfield Street has at least 10 service stations within a 2-kilometre radius, and that's only within compass directions of 180. Like everything on the other side of Tonkin Highway doesn't get included. So the reading the item 13.2.2 makes it clear why this kind of thing occurs. The report states that the city, through its town planning scheme, determines the appropriate zoning for the area and the permissibility of uses in each zone, and cannot limit the number of specific land uses within a zone. The proposed uses are capable of approval within the zone and are therefore considered appropriate in this location. To my understanding, this means that the discretion of local government in granting development approval is actually not being exercised. Instead, it's a matter of can be done, will be done. I respectfully ask that the city exercises its discretion with consideration of the livability of our neighbourhoods and the feedback from those impacted, rather than just its permissibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, that is the end of, there's no other public statements, so Mr Stevens, would you be able to turn that microphone off, please? Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll now move on. Confirmation of minutes. Can I get a mover for that, please? Councillor Islam to move that, Councillor Lloyd to second that. Thank you. Councillors, any questions on the minutes? If you'd like to cast your votes, thank you. Thank you, that has been carried. Moving on to receiving of petitions and presentations. Are there any? No? Any applications for leave of absence? No. No questions of which due notice. Okay, we'll move on to item number 13.1.1, the elector motion for the tree canopy target. Can I get a mover for this, please? Councillor Dalton to move that and Councillor Islam to second that. Councillor Dalton, would you like to speak to this item? Councillor Islam, would you like to speak to this item? Would anybody else like to speak to this item? Councillor Betts, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to compliment the staff on a very comprehensive report, and while the 30% tree canopy target for 2040 sounds a reasonable figure, and a current canopy cover is 15%, so basically would mean a doubling of the tree canopy by 2040 in a period of 15 years. As the report points out, we as a city only have 1,800 hectares roughly, and that includes that the city actually has control of, and that includes the sports fields, and we would actually need to plant all of that to reach that 30% tree canopy. So we would have to get rid of all of our ovals, all of our sports fields to be able to reach that target. So that clearly is not a realistic one. And I'm pleased to see that someone's moving an amendment shortly to bring a figure for council-controlled land, not for the whole city, because we don't have control over all the land in the city. So I think I think we're all aware of the value of trees and the benefits that they bring, and so I think certainly an increase in the tree canopy is something we all aspire to, but the 30% that was suggested by the motion at the electors meeting is simply unrealistic. So I look forward to the amendment that's going to be moved shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Betts. I'll just speak against the officer's recommendation here, so I won't be supporting this. And I do note that there is a foreshadowed motion coming, so I'm hoping that I encourage councillors to vote against this recommendation and look forward to seeing the foreshadowed motion. Would anyone else like to speak to this item? Deputy Mayor Williamson, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I too would like to speak against the staff recommendation. So the staff recommendation is asking Council to not support the motion passed at the annual electors meeting that requests the city to commit to a tree canopy of 30% by 2040. I think the staff have done a really great job of outlining why that's unrealistic, and Councillor Abetz has touched on that. But I think that can't be the end of the conversation. While 30% by 2040 is potentially unrealistic, I think the community has been very clear in that our current expectation of 15% isn't good enough and isn't meeting our community's expectations in today's day and age. So I think what we need to do is reject the staff recommendation, and as such I propose a foreshadowed motion. And the foreshadowed motion that I propose would read that Council receives the report on the motion passed at the annual electors meeting requesting the city commits to a tree canopy target of 30% by 2040. 2, that Council commits to a target of 30% tree canopy on city-owned and managed land by 2040. 3, that Council requests the CEO to list for consideration at an elected members' workshop prior to the 31st of May 2025, A, policy options to encourage tree planting and retention on private property, B, consideration of city projects such as the potential subdivision of part of Hester Park to minimise the tree canopy loss, C, development of a position statement calling on the state government to provide mechanisms to protect trees on private property. The reasons that I would propose a foreshadowed motion would be, whilst the report outlines a number of valid reasons supporting the Council not adopting a blanket canopy target of 30% by 2040 as requested at the annual electors meeting, it is clear the community has a desire for the Council to do more to increase and retain a greater tree canopy than the 15% target in our current policy. Increasing the tree canopy is a challenge for most local governments. However, it would be prudent for this council to revisit and consider all options available to reduce canopy. So just reiterating, I'm asking councillors to vote against the staff recommendation so that we have an opportunity to go away as a council, discuss all the available options, take a holistic approach and work out what the best way forward is now with our current plans and policies that we have in place, and see what we can change to make the outcomes better for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Deputy Mayor Williamson. Would anybody else like to speak to this item? Who moved this? Councillor Dalton, did you want to close this item? You happy? Councillors, if you would like to cast your vote, if you are supporting the officer's recommendation. Thank you. That has been lost, so we now move to the foreshadowed motion. Councillor Williamson, I'm happy to second that foreshadowed motion if you'd like to speak to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I won't reread the motion.
You just got a couple of lines on the back that you might have, if you want to add them in or anything.
Okay. Yes, sorry, I missed the back page. So I guess for the reason, I've already stated most of the reason, but increasing the tree canopy is a challenge for most local governments. However, it would be prudent for this council to revisit and consider all options available to reduce canopy loss while balancing development required for housing and community infrastructure in a growth council. So I'll now speak more on that. I think the thing is that we know as a local government how frustrating it is having our hands tied. So the state sets ambitious targets over growth, over housing. It's needed by our community, and then we're stuck in the middle trying to work out how can we balance the housing needs, the community needs, what sporting grounds we need, and retain tree canopy. So I think it's fair for us to call on the state government to come to the party in those discussions as well, and we need to work out a way for the entire sector to move forward. But that can take time. These things take a long time. So in that interim, as a council, we need to revisit all of our existing policies and work out what opportunities are there, what can we do different. We can look at some of the plans that we've had in place. So already we've looked at Charles Hook Park. Yes, Charles Hook in Huntingdale. We've looked at that already, and the initial plans were to remove the trees around the outer. As a council, we decided that wasn't the best outcome for our community today. Maybe 10 years ago that was acceptable, but now it's not. So we've made changes, and we're going to retain as many trees as possible. So I think when it comes to all of our plans, we need to sit down and have a look. Are we doing everything we can do to retain the trees on the land that we have? Because we know just replanting new ones is going to take years and years to catch up what we actually lose. So what I'm asking for is councillors to support this foreshadowed motion so we can open the discussions, we can start to consider what the community is clearly telling us they want, and how we can put in some solutions until the state government gets on top of giving us more authority to be able to come up with a long-term solution. So I ask you to support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Williamson. As the seconder, I'll just speak very briefly because I think you've pretty much covered everything in that, and I do look forward, and I know that we can achieve a 30% tree canopy on city-owned and managed land by 2040, so that's fantastic, that's included in there, and also definitely looking forward to how we can look at all of our policies to see what we can do a little bit better. No guarantees, of course, but if we can, we're going to look at it, and hopefully Mr CEO will bring us some wonderful solutions on that as well. So, yes, more than happy to support the foreshadowed motion. Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak to the foreshadowed motion? Councillor Good, thank you.
Thanks very much, Madam Mayor. I actually am in support of the foreshadowed motion, but I have a couple of questions that I'd like to put potentially to whichever director can answer them. But first one is, what encouragement can we do when trees are being planted and not being looked after or maintained? And I know this is city-owned stuff, but I'm just talking about general tree cover nature. Is there any way of measuring, or how can we encourage residents to actually look after their own trees? And for our part, how do we measure community expectations? How do we actually measure it? Is there an answer there?
Mr Glover's saying that he's got a good answer for you on that one. Thank you, Mr Glover, Director for Infrastructure.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you. The city puts out two ways that we go out with. Street trees is the issue here in terms of potentially unloved trees. We call for people to request to have a street tree put in front of their property, and we give them options for that street tree. And if they do request it, we know that that tree will be loved. We also go out to individual streets, many streets which have very few street trees in them, to look to try and put street trees onto the great majority of those verges. When we go out to the community, they do have the option to decline to have a street tree. We currently track around 30% declining to have street trees. We don't pursue those because we know, unfortunately, by some stretch, the poor old tree will probably pass away fairly shortly. But there are still so many opportunities around the city and verges for us to put trees in that we know they're going to be loved. And that's what we're continuing to do. And we anticipate, as the community's attitude to trees becomes more and more positive, eventually a lot more of those verges that currently don't have them will be seeking to have those trees installed. And we do locate them, we measure them, we record them within the GIS, and we also record if we have a death by natural causes or whatever, and those trees are then replaced in the next planting.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, another question to do with Deputy Mayor Williamson mentioned the words community expectation. How do we measure that?
Mr CEO will respond to that. Thank you.
We do community satisfaction and community resident sort of perception surveys every couple of years. So that's generally where we get an understanding. The last assessment we did was in association with a strategic community plan where the environment was identified most commonly as a key issue. So that's why in our current strategic community plan, the environment is the number one issue.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much. My final question, again, I am actually in support of it. I just want to make sure it's very, very clear because, yeah, I think all of us, I love trees like as much as anybody. I have a tree on my own front verge, which has only been there about 2 years, and I ordered it from day one when I moved into my new place. And I water it lovingly. Every day it gets watered without fail. It's all to do with, when I talk about measurement and how we are, is there any way in which we can look at, I'm loving the idea of a workshop too, Deputy Mayor Williamson, I love that idea, because things like, is there an attraction, I'm talking about also private land here, where potentially if you have street trees, rebate, reduction in your rate, some way of, I'm trying to get the mindset changed, because when I read in the report, I think over 500 people write in every year, could you please cut down my tree or do this and get rid of it? But we're trying to change the mindset, because like I said, I love trees too. That's my final question.
So just to clarify, your question is to how to change the mindset of people?
No, in terms of, is there any thought potentially the fact of a rate reduction and a way of incentivising people to actually love the trees, to go, hey, if I plant an extra tree, because that's a faster way to get things done, is I put 2 in your front verge. Yeah. I reckon I could easily have 2 or 3, quite frankly. So I'm saying, is there a way to, $50 off makes a big difference, just an incentive? I don't know, some way to change the mindset.
And would you be happy if that was all to come back to a workshop? Because
yes, exactly what I'm getting. I love the idea of a workshop to thrash it out. Is there a way to change the mindset of many people to say, yes, we all know, and correct me if I'm wrong, anyone who's here like the scientists and Peter Abetz is, but Councillor Abetz I should say, from memory I think it's 6 or 7 degrees cooler under the shade of a tree as far as the actual cooling effect. We know dark roofs, hotter house, we know reflection. But I'm absolutely convinced it's either 6 or 7 degrees. If you have a tree underneath there, it's cooler. Now that's significant, which means if you open your windows at the right time and breezes are coming through and you've got a street tree, less air conditioning required, you just manage the flow of breeze. You talk to your nanas and grandmas, they all know about flow of wind and breeze, and you don't have to have your heating on and cooling on so much. Just thought that you know that. My mother still tells me that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Good. Would anybody else like to speak to the foreshadowed motion? Deputy Mayor Williamson, would you like to close? No, that's okay. Councillors, would you like to cast your vote on the foreshadowed motion? Thank you. Thank you. That has been carried. We'll now move on to 13.1.2, the elector motion, which is the revitalisation along the Riverland. Can I get a mover for this, please? Councillor Singh to move this and Deputy Mayor Williamson to second this. Councillor Singh, would you like to speak to this item? Deputy Mayor Williamson? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think this was a really good motion that came at the annual electors meeting, and I think it's a really good issue to be discussing. I think the report runs through what's actually happening there at Hester Park and why it's not a straightforward solution to be able to redevelop that area of river. And I also wanted to note that AGLG was successful with gaining an election commitment to revitalise towards Homestead Park. So I think that area of the river is worth maintaining, and I just think the staff have done a good job with their report, and I'm happy to support the motion to note this, and then once we actually move forward with Hester Park, we'll consider what there is to do next. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Williamson. Would anybody else like to speak to this item? No. Councillors, if you would like to cast your vote. Thank you. Thank you. That has been carried. Moving on to 13.2.1, the budget variation for Canning Vale Development Contribution Plan Infrastructure Claim. Can I get a mover? Councillor Good to move this and a seconder. Councillor Lloyd to second this. Councillor Good, would you like to speak to this? Councillor Lloyd. Would anybody else like to speak to this item? No. Councillors, will you please cast your vote? Thank you. Thank you. That has been carried. Moving on to item 13.2.2, can I give the development application for showrooms, shops, fast food outlets, restaurant, cafe and service station, convenience store, 606 lot 101 Wharton Road, the corner of Rantford Road and Southern River. Can I get a mover for this, please? Councillor Dalton to move this and a seconder. Councillor Adams to second this. Thank you. Councillor Dalton, would you like to speak to this item? Councillor Adams? Anybody else like to speak to this item? I know. Councillor Saiful Islam is going to defer it, I think. Councillor Islam, would you like to speak to this item?
Yeah, please. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Betts.
I, Councillor Saiful Islam, propose the following, that the item under consideration be deferred for the following reason. The Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage provided additional feedback on the proposal after the agenda containing the item was published. The feedback provided by the department has implications for access to and egress from the site that the applicant was unaware of. So this is fair and reasonable. The applicant has requested that consideration of the application be deferred to allow the department's feedback considered and addressed. And I would like all of your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Islam. I'm happy to second that. You've the right to speak to it, but there's no debate on it, so want to speak to it?
No, thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor, if you please cast your vote on deferring this item. Thank you. Thank you. This has been carried. Now move on to item number 13.5.1, the policy review. Can I get a mover for this, please? Councillor Zhang to move this and a seconder. Councillor McDonald, thank you. Councillor Zhang, would you like to speak to this item? Councillor McDonald? No, thank you. Would anybody else like to speak to this item? No? Okay, councillors, you can please cast your vote. Thank you. Thank you, that has been carried. Moving on to 13.5.2, the 2025 local government elections. Can I get a mover for this, please? Councillor Betts, happy to move this, and a seconder. Councillor McDonald to second this. Councillor Betts, would you like to speak to this? Thank you.
Madam Mayor, we don't really have a lot of choice with this particular motion, but to recognise, for people in the gallery just to be aware, and those listening online, that a council election is a pretty costly business at over $400,000, and the fact that it's increased by some 30% over the last couple of years, and because it is a postal vote, the cost of postage going to every single person on the electoral roll, plus all those who are property owners who don't live in the city, who've put themselves on the register. There's quite a significant cost involved in sending all those ballot papers out, and there really isn't a way around that. And so I guess the only other alternative would be to appoint me as the dictator, and that wouldn't be so good, I don't think. So, so I think we don't have a lot of choice. And that is to simply approve this. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Betts. Would anybody else like? Councillor Good, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I echo Councillor Betts's comments. Dictator of Betts, that would be very, very interesting indeed. But the fact is, it's such a serious issue, the fact that we're going to be budgeting for $432,000, and I think that's $110,000 more than what it was, 4 years ago, and it's such a short period of time, and you're thinking, that's a 34% increase. You think of the costs involved. There is always the argument, do you actually cancel the election? Not this one come up with, legally can't, but go to every 4 years, like a state or federal with 3 years, and just have all in, all out. But the fact that it's going to cost this much money is a lot of money, and every 2 years, and you can almost envisage it hitting 450, 500 and so on, because postage rates themselves just keep skyrocketing. But we have no choice, as you really say. Just so that people both at home and in the audience know, we've discussed this earlier in terms of, is there a better way? Is there another way? I mean, even the thought of electronic voting has been discussed, which I would be gratefully in support of, but I am actually acutely aware of the hidden dangers of electronic voting at the moment, and I'm sure probably the Director of Business Services may know as well, but hacking and making it foolproof, actually electronic hacking, is one of the key issues. They just can't get it right. The authorities just are not positive that it can actually work, and being hacked is not a pleasant experience, and having your vote hacked, even worse. So they've got to get it right before it can even get out there. We have no choice. I have to support it, but I wish there was a better, simpler, cheaper way of just getting people to be able to vote. So I will support it, but just think how costly it actually is, and it's become almost a joke. But to think $432,000, if I say it slower, there's really to sink in. That's an awful lot of money. And could we do it in other things like buy more trees? Yes. But there you go.
Thank you, councillor Good. Councillor Lloyd, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate a bit of what Councillor Good said. I was really shocked when I read this, over $400,000, and to think that our response rate was, this year, approximately 35%. I think at the last election it was 31 or 32. But I just wonder, is there more that we could be doing? I know that we all talk about every election asking people to come out, have your say, but that maybe just to reiterate that every ratepayer is paying for this service. So wouldn't it be great if they actually utilised it and ticked a box or put a number in a box this time because they're paying for it anyway. So maybe we could do a little bit more advertising around election time to say, did you realise your money has paid for this? And maybe we can get people to get a little bit more involved.
Thank you, councillor Lloyd. Would anybody else like to speak to this item? No, councillors, if you'd like to cast your vote, thank you. Thank you, that has been carried. Moving on to 13.5.3, the panel for 01-2025, design, manufacture and installation of shade sails. Can I get a mover? Councillor Good to move this, Councillor Adams to second this. Councillor Good, would you like to speak to this item? Councillor Adams? Would anybody else like to speak to this item? No. Thank you, councillors. Please cast your vote. Thank you. That has been carried. Moving on to 13.5.4, the tender for 02-2025 street signs and associated hardware. Can I get a mover for this, please? Councillor Singh to move this. Councillor Zhang to second this. Councillors, would Councillor Singh, Councillor Zhang, would you like to speak to this item? Would anybody else? Councillor Betts, thank you.
Just wondering, has the city ever considered doing this work in-house? Would that be cheaper than actually tendering it out, and just the extra flexibility that gives us by having it in-house?
Madam Mayor, we've had some conversations about what we might do around signage when we move to the new operations centre and what we might be able to put in. But at the moment, with the operations centre as it is, it's much more difficult to do something like this in-house.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak to this item? No, councillors, please cast your vote. Thank you. Thank you. That has been carried. There is a motion here of which previous notice has been given, and that's 14.1, the review of delegations, development applications, and Councillor Dewhurst has put in writing to me today to move this on his behalf, which is what is required under the Act if you're putting a motion up, so I'm happy to move this. and I am seeking a seconder for this, councillors. Councillor Islam's happy to second this. And I'll just quickly briefly speak to it in that you'll all be aware that there was an application that was originally refused under delegated authority, and just to make sure that that's all very clear in future and that doesn't happen again, because we may never have known about it if someone had just walked away, then it's best just to have the CEO to review what happens in that space so that it's all very, very clear as to what can and can't be refused without it going to council. So, councillors, I seek your support on this motion. Thank you. Councillor Islam, would you like to speak to this item? Councillor Good like to speak to the item? Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Just a question regarding the delegation itself and the ability to interpret what is actually required. Is there a particular one where it's actually saying it was misunderstood? Because I'm trying to work out how did it get misunderstood. Can you give me any clarification as to what was something, was the unintended wording, or how was it misunderstood?
Yep, and Mr Terrelling, Director for Planning, will be able to respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What had happened is that when the application came in, it was a bit thin on background information. But what we did know about the site was that it had been advertised for lease of space on the site, and combined with the plans that were received, the team took the view that it was actually a different land use, that it was storage on the site, which is storage for other people. And that's why the application was refused, because the delegation's quite clear that the staff should be able to refuse a land use which is not permitted, because there's no discretion in that case for the council to approve. Although, as it transpired, the applicant came back and wanted to have the sea containers considered actually on their merits and separate from the compliance issue. And the compliance issue had effectively been settled at that time with Mr Bradbrook's team's help. So that's how the decision came to be called back and put to the council for consideration just of the sea container issue.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Good.
Yes, it does. And I just wanted to seek clarification that to this review, which, by the way, I'm actually supportive of, but again, I want to make the point clear that interpretation of words and wording, I want to make sure that so it doesn't happen again. So the intent is clearly spelled out in the policy, so the delegation is clearly understood. And basically, I've always believed you should have A, B, C, D, and then all of the above plus. So you've got a way to say, well, this could be included in the delegation. So it's not so rigid, and I appreciate the answer before. So if that's the intent, where it's very clear to the officers, and so that the wording is not misunderstood, then that's a good thing. So is that what's going to happen?
Thank you. Yes, that is what's going to happen. Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak on this, councillors? Deputy Mayor Williamson, thank you.
Thank you. I just am going to speak in support of the motion, but I did want to clarify that while I'm supporting this, I don't believe there was a misunderstanding of the delegated authority. What I believe occurred was the staff, based on the application, read the delegation authority and acted on that, and after that point, different information came about. The applicants requested different things. I think the staff acted appropriately. They followed the delegated authority, and I think even if we did change words, we couldn't preempt the applicant coming back and changing the information and changing what they wanted and their different reasoning. So I'm supportive of reviewing delegation to make sure everything's clear, but I don't know that there will actually be a change that would prevent what we saw occur at the last council meeting happening again. Applicants change things after the time, and you can't prevent that. So thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Williamson. Anybody else like to speak to this item, councillors? No? Okay, councillors, you'd like to cast your vote. Thank you. Thank you. That has been carried. There is no urgent business, no confidential matters, and Councillor Adams is already waving goodbye. So at 7:44, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you, everyone, for attending this evening. Safe travels home. Thank you.